Okay. All right. Game on. Hey, Dr. Jill. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you, Brooke?
I'm doing great. Welcome everyone who's here and welcome Dr. Jill Waller to our live Q&A for Keshan VIPs, Conclave members, and special guests and superfans, all things Egypt. So we've got you here because we really appreciate your support and we know that you are curious with anything to do with Egypt. That's why you're here. That's why you love Keshanar. So Dr. Jill, we're grateful to have her as our in-house Egyptologist, is here to answer all your questions and more. So what's going to happen here, guys, is we're going to see you in the chat. And then as the questions come up, then we will, pop them on and I will feed them to Dr. Jill. And she'll go ahead and answer. So anyone who has a question, we can start with that. But I have one just to begin with, Dr. Jill Waller. My question is, and this is not about Egypt, it's about you. So sorry to shake things up a little bit, but we're going to do it just to get started. What most fascinated you about Egypt and got you started in Egyptology in the first place? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I actually several of my colleagues fell in love with ancient Egypt due to a book series, the Amelia Peabody series by Elizabeth Peters. And because I started reading them when I was like 11, and I quickly realized that I was more interested in what they were excavating than whatever mystery they were trying to solve. So, but I then found out that the books were actually written by an actual Egyptologist. So the author's real name was Barbara Mertz, and she got her PhD in Egyptology at University of Chicago. And so then I just kind of fell in love, and I guess I'm stubborn because I never changed my mind.
I think stubborn's a good thing. Thank you for that. Oh, good. Thank you, Ryan. So we've got some questions coming in from fans. Can you tell us about Sekhmet's chamber at Karnak, Dr. Jill? That's a question from Ryan Blackstock. Sekhmet's
Sekhmet's chamber? Do you mean chapel? I'm
Probably
not.
chapel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's
Um,
say Sekhmet.
So there is that statue of Sekhmet at Karnak, and most temples had uh, chapels to various gods. The temple would be dedicated to one main god, but then in there would then be chapels to other gods as well. So I believe there is a chapel to Sekhmet at Karnak, because she was a very popular goddess in ancient Egypt, not only a goddess of war and plagues, but also a goddess of healing. So very, very popular. Um, but also popular among kings for those same reasons, for the war aspect and healing aspect. And they were the ones who really set up these chapels and everything. I can't remember off the top of my head when or that particular chapel would have been built. Karnak was built over thousands of years. The first earliest temple on that spot was built in the Middle Kingdom to the god Amun, and then in the New Kingdom, especially, like almost every king added to it all the way through Ptolemaic and Roman period. So it
Oh, wow.
constantly was changing. But yeah,
Got added
it's
to the time. Okay.
yes, so it's right next to Ptah, which made sense because Ptah was her consort, and Nefertum was their child, so that made sense. Yes. So that would have been to basically, yeah, the Memphite triad, which would have been companion to the Theban triad, which more the temples at Karnak were dedicated to. Uh,
Okay. Dr. Jill, I have a question from Facebook.
mhm.
I'm also going to tell you and the audience that our youngest Egyptology buff has entered our room. That would be my son. His name is Ralph. So if you hear something in the background, that's what you're hearing. He is curious about Egypt too,
Okay.
like that. Hey, buddy, can you talk to Dr. Jill with me for a minute? So, Dr. Jill, We got a question here. As someone who does reenactment, I would be interested to know what an encampment looked like. What kinds of tents did they use? A frame, etc. Also, we know that going into the temple with skins, leather, etc., was considered unclean. So how is it they were able to use leather armor when fighting? So we've got the tents question, the encampment question, and then also the leather armor question.
So, as to the tents, well, basically tents haven't really changed that much in thousands of years. They would have had uh, wood poles and probably built up. They were usually collapsible in some ways so that they could be easily carried. The actual tents themselves were normally of matting or some sort of fabric linen material. But again, lightweight, so they could be folded up and carried, is kind of the big thing. Tents also, there were often, especially the bigger ones, they did have frames, especially there would have been a large royal tent for the king, or if he was leading the campaign, or if it was led by, say, the crown prince, again, he would be in the large royal tent. Um, that one would probably be a larger frame than the other normal tents for everything else. But overall, tents again are pretty much same throughout a lot of history. As to the question about leather, so actually, this is a popular misconception. So the whole thing about leather being unclean actually only comes from Greco-Roman sources. So we don't have any evidence that that was a thing before that time period. And even then, it seems to be in very specific contexts. Say, for example, for Wab priests, Wabs were literally purification priests. So it made sense that they had kind of extra rules. But even then, some sources kind of indicate that it might have been even less about being unclean and more about the type of animal that the hide came from. Like, it's kind of rude to walk into the temple of a cow goddess wearing cowhide leather, right? So it's something like that.
Sure.
But actually, throughout all of Egyptian history, there were some priests who specifically did wear hides or animal products. For example, Sem priests are very often throughout Egyptian history shown as wearing leopard skins. So it wasn't, you know, not, it definitely wasn't something that was considered bad, though they were required to wear that as part of their uniform. And other objects were definitely made of leather. Sandals are the most common. In fact, the word for leather maker and sandal maker is the same word because it's the most common type of leather item. But they also, of course, have had bads, reins, armor of leather. And actually, if you're especially interested in leather armor, I'd suggest there is a wonderful book that only came out last year and is available to read free online by Selema Ikram uh, and Andre Veldmeyer. It's called like Let the Cows Be Brought or something like that. You can read it for free online, and it's all about the leather products in Tutankhamun's tomb, including a gorgeous piece of leather armor, which has been painstakingly restored. So that's a resource to check out, definitely, if you're interested in that, especially for reconstructions, because again, it's been painstakingly restored and they show how it looks.
We'll drop that link in the chat here in a minute, y'all. Thank you, Dr. Jill.
Mhm.
So I've got another chat question, Mr. Weaver. What do you think will be the next clue or breakthrough that will be found or discovered that will be important to what we know about ancient Egypt? And do you think that it will be changing, groundbreaking? Will it change what's currently believed? What's the next big
I
thing?
Yeah, I wish I knew. I will say that there is a lot of, especially if you're going, groundbreaking stuff, work in, say, for example, the Valley of the Kings, where the tomb of Thutmose II was discovered earlier this year, and that has, changed a lot. They're still working on that tomb. They might find something in that tomb, which could, rewrite parts of the 18th dynasty. There's also a lot of work at Abydos where actually it seems like in the second intermediate period there was a line of kings that wasn't really known about very much until a few years ago. And also there they've discovered another royal tomb, possibly from that line, very recently. So all of this, kind of going to rewriting that history of, second intermediate period through early New Kingdom. But other than that, unfortunately, like a lot of things we just don't know until it shows up. So, but they are also in the
Well,
Valley of the Kings looking for other tombs. There are a couple of different expeditions because there are several royal tombs that have not been found, and a lot of royal tombs, especially of the 18th dynasty queens and royal children, that have not been found. So they're looking for those.
so now I'm curious. So what would be the kinds of things that could be overturned in our thinking or our understanding based on finds like this, right? So Mr. Weaver's question, what kind of category of knowledge would we, or have we in the past uncovered with a new discovery of a tomb that has shifted something that we had believed before? Can you give us an example of a time that that has happened? Because I'm,
Well,
as
again,
a,
like the Abydos dynasty, again, that hasn't been very well understood until recently. It's always been kind of the idea that during that period, there were only uh, certain areas where there was, power in Egypt. Honestly, though, a lot of things that change our understanding our own biases. That's really the biggest area where um, we've learned so much more. And often that's even just reevaluating older materials. So, for example, there's a lot of great work being done on tattooing in ancient Egypt, especially tattooing of women, particularly by a scholar, Anne Austen. And the problem has been that in the past, scholars, read old white men, have really interpreted these tattooed women as being concubines, prostitutes, things like that. No, they were high priestesses of Hathor and held very important religious roles. But it's just something that, modern biases colored so much that there wasn't room to actually see the true meaning of them.
That fascinates me. So we had a whole category of people who were of very high stature, who were holy, were
Mhm.
priestesses, and people thought the opposite, right? That they were of the lowest status.
Yeah, yeah.
Just because of our biases. Hmm.
And yeah, also especially because these tattoos on that we actually have on mummified remains match also then tattoos that we see on specific female figurines, paddle dolls and other figurines which have commonly been termed um, like fertility figurines or even concubines for the tomb or whatever. But the tattoos match like almost exactly. So very clearly that these first of all also these representations, these female figurines which have previously been considered to be like concubines for the dead or even toys, very clearly represent priestesses of Hathor or women who were important in temple cults.
Hmm. I think it's just as a side note, this is not my show, so feel free anybody else to have questions in the chat, but I do have a question around that.
Mhm,
I continue to find it interesting that in the I feel like that scholarship, or at least I feel like I have seen that scholarship in the last maybe 20 years, maybe longer, has really turned toward this question of examining what did we get wrong
mhm,
um, because of our own biases, or what did we get wrong because we anachronistically, asserted something about our culture, sort of put it back on Egypt, right?
mhm,
Um, uh, on other ancient culture, but Egypt in this case. Are there other examples you can think of that particular line of thinking, right? It's that kind of scholarship in the last 20 years where someone's really overturned and thought, hey, that's anachronistic. Like we got that wrong. Um, it fascinates me because I've seen it happen with across different cultural studies, and it seems like it's happening in Egyptology too.
I mean, a lot of that stuff, it's not even necessarily within scholarship, but also a lot of times it then goes to popular culture. Um, so
Mm,
for example, like the misconception that ancient Egyptians worship cats. It's not really what's happening. It's that certain animals, not just cats, um, a lot of different animals were representative of various gods, and that's because those gods were portrayed as those animals, not because they really thought that Sekhmet was walking around with a lioness head, but because the gods were personifications more of concepts. They had no idea what they actually looked like, so they connected them to animals with similar attributes and then portrayed them as having the attributes of those animals. And thus then those animals became sacred to those gods. So actually even then, like the whole Herodotus quote about anybody who kills a cat would be, even accidentally, would be killed. Actually, that's not just talking about cats. I think that particular quote is even also talking about ibises or hawks. I can't remember which one. Ibises being sacred to the god Thoth, hawks being sacred to the god Horus. So it's not just cats. Actually, there's a couple of wonderful blogs about that I can also send. But or even things like you know Akhenaten and monotheism, and there are also a lot of scholars who still very much are in the monotheism camp. That was monotheism, but a lot of scholars think it was definitely more of a monolatry where the Aten was placed above other gods. I mean, even in houses at Amarna, we still have images of like Bes and Talweret and common household gods. And that doesn't seem to have been a problem. Now, over time, had Akhenaten lived longer, he might have gotten rid of them as well, because he didn't get rid of Amun right away. Um, but, it's not, a lot of the interpretations are trying to put it in the lens of, modern monotheistic religions where it's not necessarily one to one. Again, the gods were more personifications of concepts and they were everywhere. So it's hard to take out things like, Ma'at and Heka.
yep. Okay. So we've got some more coming in here. Next one. I'm curious, why would the Khopesh sword be made when it seems straight swords are easier to make and use? So what was that about the shape of that sword?
Well, actually, that was not originally Egyptian. Khepes sword was taken from Levantine styles. So, but it's still, while yes, in some ways a straight sword is easier to use, the way the curved is does allow kind of slicing more. So and it also just depends on the weight and balance and that sort of thing. So there are some wonderful reproductions that you can buy if you're really into swords. But yeah, they can really whip around a little bit.
So I can see everybody who's watching. So our Keshanar's creator Dave Hadden is here in the chat. He says, "I can say that in terms of game mechanics, in Keshanar, the hooked Khopesh enables disarming attempts on your opponent." So that's good. That's a good thing to know.
Mhm.
Um, So we've got a couple questions, Dr. Jill. Speaking of Keshanar and everyone who's just joining us, this is Keshanar's live stream for VIPs and superfans only with exclusive access with Egypt questions to our in-house Egyptologist, Dr. Jill Waller. Go ahead and drop your questions in the chat. We're answering any of them. So this one is sort of a dual question, Jill. So Mr. Weaver says, besides your experience and expertise in Egyptology, what personal experience do you have with tabletop RPGs? I know the answer to this question. I see you smiling. I'm also smiling. Um,
uh yeah, the
so
answer
go for it.
is, before I got this job, none. I have a lot of friends who are really, really into RPGs, but I never did. And then I got this job and literally had never played an RPG before getting this job. So
And now we've turned her to the dark side.
I don't know if I'm quite there
Maybe,
yet,
maybe.
but
Can we say we have? So Mr. Weaver, we are fortunate in Keshanar, and in North End Productions to have found someone who, even though at the beginning of this project she did not know tabletop RPGs, was willing to be our expert on all things Egypt. So we're grateful to have her, and we're hoping that some of the gaming might rub off, maybe just a little bit. Um, so Ryan Blackstock, what do you think the original Sphinx's head looked like? I've actually always wondered this. This is a good question.
I mean, pretty similar to what it is now. It definitely was, image of Khafre. So with the Nemes headdress.
Well, give us a little history there. So for those who might not know it, so what would have happened? What do we know that did in fact happen to the original, and why would it have looked sort of similar now and then? What's the story there?
Well, I mean, so the Sphinx itself, a lot of people say it was actually like 10,000 years old or whatever. No, it was carved during the reign of Khafre, most likely Khafre, but definitely during the fourth dynasty. Um, Basically, the Sphinx is part of what was left over from the quarry, because part of the reason that the pyramids of Giza are where they are is that the stone is right there. Like the limestone quarries are right there. They didn't have to move it far. So the Sphinx was kind of part of what was left over, which also is why the body looks a little weird if you look over the top of it. It's kind of like extra long and a little awkward. But so they made it into, what they wanted. But sphinxes as the king as a sphinx was a very common iconographic image throughout Egyptian history. Um, there are several other famous examples where the king's head on top of a lion's body, it was meant to basically portray the king as having, the strength of a lion. So similar to how, Egyptian gods are shown as various animals, same thing. Um, so that one was like 99% sure carved during the reign of Khafre. We know this because of the archaeology and the different buildings around it. And kind of looking at that, there's been a lot of work on that by Mark Lehner, who is kind of head archaeologist at Giza. So if Google him and Sphinx, you'll find several articles. There's stuff in a couple of his books. There's also, I think, a blog about it online by him. He kind of explains that a lot. But so it would have been kind of the image of Khafre, which we have from other statues. Uh, Today it has been damaged in some ways, like, part of the nose is gone and that sort of stuff. But in general, the gist is still kind of there. I think it has been, fixed a couple times, but it would have looked like the image of the King Khafre, like on his statues.
Okay. So I'm going to do a shameless plug here for you, Dr. Jill. So questions like this, I'm wondering if they are answered in your course on digital Hammurabi, which we want to tell all our VIPs and superfans about real quick. We're going to drop the link to that course in the description of the class. But you do an Egyptologist, just a general overview, sort of 101. Do you not on digital Hammurabi?
Uh, we have, yeah. So I've done several courses through Digital Hammurabi. The one coming up does not is not like overview of basic history or anything. That is religion and daily life. So more talking about domestic shrines, also, various types of religious iconography you'd see on objects, magic and medicine. Also even temples and how they interacted with the local community, how festivals worked, and who would have been part of those festivals, that sort of thing. So how religion affected the daily life of normal Egyptian people. So that's the
That's,
course that I'm teaching, actually, that starts in like a week and a half, I want to say. I want to say it starts on the 10th. But I
great.
have
Well, we're
taught
going
other,
to
yeah, I have taught other
Mhm.
classes. We're actually also I taught a class in January uh, on mythology, and we're actually working on making a version of that for. Um, we're working on an online catalog where you can buy courses to watch at your leisure. Um, but
So we
that
will, um, we'll drop the links to those classes of Dr. Jill's on the
mhm,
platform Digital Hammurabi in the description. So
yeah.
another question, what is the original name for Sekhmet and Set? For example, Isis was Lisette. What? So there are these names have shifted. Can you give us the original names for Sekhmet and Set, please?
Yeah, so Isis was actually more Eset than Auset, but yes, Eset. Sekhmet was Sekhmet, actually. So actually Sekhem means
Okay.
power. So Sekhmet is the feminine version of power. Her name literally means the powerful one.
Wow.
Set was Set or Sutek. Um, yeah, there are other ones that have shifted a lot more. So actually, for example, Thoth is one of the biggest shifts. Thoth in ancient Egypt was actually Jehuti. So that's
Oh,
kind of a
wow.
bigger shift. But a lot of them are very similar. Also, like Nephthys was Nebetut. So some of them have shifted more than others.
How did the shift from Jehuti to Thoth happen? That's significant.
That happened basically through the lens of Greek. So some of those sounds were not there, so they basically dropped. Well, actually, the Y ending might have already dropped in the language by then, but they had a tendency to write, especially God's names, the original way that they were written. So it might have already in the Egyptian language been more like Jut or Tut or Tot or something like that, and then in Greek became Tot, Toth or Thoth.
Okay. All right. So through the lens of the Greek language.
Yeah, like also all the IS endings, Isis, Osiris, Nephthys, those are all Greek additives.
Hmm.
So Isis was Iset, Osiris was Usir, again, Nephthys was Nebetut. So that's
Huh.
all Greek.
So all that's been handed down to us and was actually sort of a late in the game shift, huh?
Hmm. Yep.
All right. Um, so we have a couple of questions. Let's see. Let's see what I might have missed in the chat here. We've got the Kopesh, game mechanics. What animal do you think oh, this one's a good one. What animal, thank you, Ryan Blackstock, for this one. What animal do you think Set was based on? What is your personal opinion, Dr. Jill? What do you think?
My personal opinion is I like the theory that he is an amalgam and not a real animal. Because he is a god of chaos. So it makes sense that he would be kind of this chaotic mix of various things. But I've seen a lot of other theories, anteater, aardvark, various jackals. But again, I like the idea that he was a chaotic mix of animals that did not truly exist in nature.
Huh. Um, the chaotic mix is very D&D oriented. We're just wondering which he is. Chaotic good, chaotic neutral. Which one is he? Um,
Set is actually more chaotic neutral. He's not evil. I mean, he
no?
did murder his brother, but he's also a mass.
That.
Yeah, he's also a major defender of the god Ra, particularly against the snake Apep, because as a god of chaos, Apep is also a god of chaos, and Set is one of the only gods that is immune to Apep's powers because of the shared chaotic nature. So actually, one way that Apep attacks Ra and other gods is he hypnotizes them, and Set is completely immune to that.
Huh. So he's the only force that can stand against APUP.
Hmm. So
Interesting.
in that case, he's chaotic good. In other cases, yes, chaotic evil with, yeah, again, the whole first murder in Egyptian history thing.
You can stand by, folks, to see how we've treated that in Keshanar in the fantasy world. It's may or may not be a little bit different. Um, so Gray Jedi, good question. Dr. Jill, when did the Egyptians have widespread iron weapons and tools?
Not until much later in Egyptian history. Most of Egyptian history, it was like copper tools. And any iron, like the dagger in Tutankhamun's tomb, was actually only from meteoric iron. They did not figure out how to make iron until the later Iron Age, which made sense, which would have been more the type, first millennium BCE.
Okay. All right. So it's funny how that sounds to us, right? So much, much, much later was first millennium BCE. The span was a
Well, when
remark.
you're talking thousands of years of history, starting 3000 BCE and earlier, and yeah, that's a lot later.
That's impressive. So we've got another question on APEP. So I think the little tongue in cheek. So APEP is the snake from Jungle Book. So I think the behind that is some curiosity about APEP in general. Can you tell us a little bit more about APEP? I will say APEP features heavily in Keshanar as well, the fantasy spin on APEP. So learning a little more about the real lore would be good.
Yeah, so APEP is basically giant snake that he tries to stop Ra every night. So basically, in Egyptian mythology, they have, first of all, two types of time, both linear and cyclical, both of which happen at the exact same time. But as part of the cyclical, every day, Ra travels through the sky, that's daytime. And then at night, there are different versions. Some of them he travels through the sky goddess Nut, but in most cases, in most of the books of the afterlife, he travels through the underworld. And actually, in these books of the afterlife, you can follow his journey throughout the 12 hours of the night. Because hopefully when you die, you will join him. But at one point, the god Apep does try to stop Ra and basically try to stop the eternal cycle, thus allowing the world to fall back into chaos and everything to end. Um, so various other gods help Ra fight him off every night, including Set. Um, Different books of the afterlife have different versions of what happens. So, like, there's the Book of the Amduat, the Book of Gates, the Book of Caverns, etc. Each one has slightly different versions, but in general, have to fight off Apep to continue the nightly journey. There is one version where Apep does actually manage to swallow the god Ra, but then he ends up
Uh-oh.
throwing him up pretty quickly, which then is kind of a symbolic story of rebirth. But so it's unclear if he actually won, what would happen, if he would actually like end the world or not, but or if he even really wants to. But
Remains to be seen.
yeah,
It's a good
but
question. Will he or
Apep
will he not?
was then generally considered one of those, he was one of the few gods which was not neutral. Most gods could be seen as, different versions of whatever concept they personified. Apep was just bad. He was just bad. There was no real good there. Other than, being part of the overarching universe design. But so with that, actually, there were also then different rituals. There's the Book of Overthrowing Apep. He was, in general, a bad thing that you wanted to ward off in various ways.
Okay. Thank you. So, good question from Grey Jedi. Did Egyptians ever use mercenaries like the Greeks did?
Yes,
Or
absolutely.
like the Greeks, rather. Yeah.
Yes. So actually, the most famous example of this is definitely, although arguable whether or not we should really call them mercenaries. In fact, actually, at the conference that we were just at, RC, Stuart Tyson Smith did bring this up in one of his talks where he was arguing that especially Nubian soldiers, we've called them mercenaries in the past, but the connections with Egyptian culture is such that they're not really mercenaries. They are soldiers that were recruited, from another area, but they were then integrated into Egyptian culture. So mercenaries, but Egyptians did they did definitely hire people from other areas who had specific skills. For example, during the Middle Kingdom, especially, Nubian soldiers were hired because of their skills with a bow and arrow. So during, especially then, the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, the end of the First Intermediate Period, when Egyptian kings, especially the Theban kings, were trying to reunite all of Egypt, those soldiers from Nubia were instrumental in that fight. And actually, there's a beautiful model set from Asyut of soldiers, which comes from around that time period, and Nubian soldiers are among them.
Okay. All right. We have a lively discussion going on in the chat here about gold. So the originating question was, I know pharaohs were typically buried with a lot of gold in their tombs. This is from Thomas. Was gold a common enough mineral? And so Dave and Thomas are talking back and forth about gold and Nubia. Can you weigh in on this discussion, Dr. Jill?
So gold was definitely more common in Egypt and Nubia than it was in other areas of the ancient world. And David is definitely correct that the word Nubia comes from nub, meaning gold. And in fact, that's also part of why the Egyptian kings often wanted to kind of keep control of Nubia, because they wanted control of those mines.
Mm,
But there were definitely periods where they didn't have access to as much gold, although the rest of the ancient world definitely believed that they had lots and lots of gold. In fact, in the Amarna letters, there's even one specific line where king from the Levant says basically, send us gold. Gold is like dirt in Egypt. Send us some. But so because of that, actually then silver was in many periods more expensive than gold because that definitely had to be imported. There weren't really
mm.
good mines for silver in Egypt. So, but yeah, gold was definitely very expensive. I will say too, though, that in other periods, especially like in the third intermediate period, they probably stole gold from, previous artifacts, melted it down and made new ones. So there was a little bit of reuse, which that's part of why it seemed to be in every period. There wasn't an inexhaustible supply. But again, there was more in Egypt than in other areas.
So say that last bit again for me, Dr. Jill. So they stole
So,
gold
okay,
and
so
well,
for example,
yeah.
in the third intermediate period, the the country was kind of split again, but we do have like gorgeous tombs of the kings of Tanis, which lots of artifacts made of gold and silver and that sort of stuff. Now, at the end of the New Kingdom, in the end of the Ramessid period, we know there was a lot of looting of royal tombs. In fact, we even have papyri, commonly referred to as the tomb robbery papyri, where officials go around and check the royal tombs to see which ones have been broken into. Um, but there's definite evidence at like Tanis and that sort of thing that they brought artifacts to Tanis from earlier periods. Like there are a lot of Middle Kingdom statues and things like that found at Tanis um, that would have originally been in temples in other areas. So part of that, they took those objects to the current capital and probably melted down and reused what they wanted to use. Actually, also like coffin reuse was very common in various periods, things like that. They would just reuse them so that they didn't run out of resources.
Hmm. Okay. Yet another thing I did not know. Most of what you have told us tonight, I did not know, and I'm appreciative. Um, so we have a couple questions about Assassin's Creed and a conversation about it. Isn't APEP the big snake thing you have to fight in the underworld in Assassin's Creed Origins? Yes. That I know, not because I play Assassin's Creed, but because my best friend does. But then, so thank you for that, Game Girl. So that though has spawned a discussion about the nature of the underworld and who rules the underworld, right? And so, because of the game Assassin's Creed and the APEP appearing there,
Mhm.
The question of, is it Osiris? Is it Apep? How does that work? What's their relationship? I think is within the discussion right here now. Can you weigh in on that?
So Apep does live in the underworld, but he's not like god of the underworld. As Dave says, Osiris is the ruler of the underworld. And that is because actually Osiris was ruler of the earth at one point. He was the eldest son of Geb and Nut, and so he was made ruler of the earth. This is part of the jealousy that drove Set to kill him because Set was his younger brother. So Set murdered him, scattered his pieces around. And then Isis had to go around collecting all of his body parts.
Ugh,
And as part of that collection, then she, with the help of other gods like Anubis, wrapped him to keep them all together, hence making Osiris the first ever mummy. Um, Now, because Osiris was the first being to ever die, he became the ruler of the underworld. So he was there first. He gets to be king, and he was king of the earth, so it made sense, right? Um, So he is the leader, ruler of the underworld. There are also a lot of other gods there with him. Basically, the pretty much all the gods can make appearances in the underworld for one reason or another, but he is the main ruler of the underworld.
gotcha. But Apep lives there. Got it.
Mhm.
Okay. So we've got a cool question from Ryan Blackstock. Why doesn't Anput get more love? So the divine feminine counterpart to Anubis, outside of um, the seven. My eyes. I need glasses. Um, Outside of the 17th gnome. So
That is
what what
and
what is that?
That is an
Why?
excellent question.
Okay.
And basically, that's very, very common with a lot of gods in ancient Egypt. So basically, what Ryan is getting to, there was a feminine version of Anubis, Input. So Inpu was the ancient Egyptian name for Anubis. Input was feminine version. Most Egyptian gods actually, then not all, but a lot of them did have feminine versions. For example, Amun, and then there was Amenet. But Amenet is not really seen as his main consort in Thebes, for example, Mut is. So other and like even Bes, household god, there was a female version, Beset. It seemed
Mm,
and it seems to be very, very common, but it's also unclear in some cases whether they are the companions, where some cases they very much are, like Amun and Amenet in the Amun's role in the Adwar. Amenet is definitely his female companion. But in other cases, it's unclear if it's just that god as a female version. Um, so because Anubis Inpu was the main god of the 17th gnome, they did definitely look at both, but outside of that, why the feminine version didn't take off, honestly, I can't really say, other than, again, that was very, very common with a lot of other gods throughout Egypt as well, where the
mm,
main version was the one that took off and was popular elsewhere. But you also have to remember that most areas had their own version of gods, even if they were, you know, a very popular god, a main god, there might be local differences in how that god was perceived.
okay. So we've got time for just a couple more questions here, running up on the 45-minute mark, but we do have some interesting ones from Facebook that I want to pull out, Dr. Jill. So, what is the coolest trap that you've ever heard of in an Egyptian tomb? So I think this question is getting at like, hey, let's hear about some traps and maybe we can pull them into our campaigns, into
Hmm.
our dungeons. So what do you think about that? What's the coolest trap you've ever heard of?
Um, hmm. Coolest trap. I mean, there's definitely like misdirects, lots and lots of pits. I like the ones personally where they had it so that there were large stones which were put in place after it closed. It's not really a trap, but to deter thieves. More I like those because thieves were very, very smart and usually then like tunneled around the giant stones. um So that's also because generally the people who were robbing these tombs, they were very often robbed very soon after the people were buried. A lot of times the robbers were people who had worked on the tomb, so they knew all the traps. Um,
Knew how to spring them.
yeah, but I mean, there weren't any traps like you see in the movies with like poison darts shooting out or anything. That no, it was mainly like pits and
Right.
giant stones that would be hard to tunnel through, that sort of stuff.
Dave is chiming in here. Dave says the portcullis seals. Yep.
The sorry, what? The portico seals?
Portcullis seals. Yep. We'll ask you about that one later, Dave. We'll ask you about it in Keshinar. Okay. So we have just a couple. Let's give it just one more. Everybody, we're really excited that you tuned in tonight. Thank you for that. Just one more question here. Let me look through the chat.
Oh, is he talking about
Um,
like the seals on doors? Because that is something too. They would seal the door with like
Tell us
a
about
clay
that.
thing. And
Okay.
then when you open the door, it would break. So it was very obvious that somebody had gone in. And that was common on most doors, even like in temples.
So not just tombs.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Um, so in temples, so in other words, now I'm curious. So the temples that were in use, so that you
Yeah.
would seal a door in an active temple, what would that be sealed
Yeah.
against?
Um, so that nobody would enter. So for example, it was very common that like the shrine which held the image of the god, which would have usually been made of very expensive materials, would be sealed anytime the high priest was not in it.
Oh, this is repeated. So they
Yeah.
could just seal it over and
They
over.
would seal
Oh,
it
okay.
like every day, and it would be sealed with the name of the high priest or whatever, so that and they would keep that seal with them, so nobody could also do it. And if
Hmm.
somebody saw that that was broken or different seal was used, that was evidence that somebody had been in there.
Hmm. Wonder if we
Ancient
could make that a
Egyptian
magic
version of
seal
a lock.
block. Got it. Got it. Um, so one last one. This is a bit of a morbid question to end on, and we do have one special announcement after it, but I do want to get to it. Because Grey Jedi, thank you for all your great questions tonight. Did Egyptians ever execute people who worked on the tombs to keep them secret? Is that a
No.
thing that happened?
No,
No?
no. I mean,
Okay.
we do have some evidence of possible human sacrifice in the pre-dynastic period, but and that's highly debated. But no, they definitely did not. And quite frankly, if they had, there probably would have been less tombs broken into. But it's very also common that people who worked on the tombs would work on, multiple tombs throughout their lifetime. So definitely not.
Okay. It's a good answer to end on. So everybody, thank you for joining with Dr. Jill Weller. We have a couple of special announcements for you. Thanks for waiting for the end for those. First of all, we've already stated Dr. Jill has a course coming up on the platform Digital Hammurabi. You'll find the link to that in the description for this live stream. So go ahead, head over. If you want any more of your Egypt questions answered, you can have Dr. Jill at your disposal to do so during this course. Secondly, we have a special announcement. We are dropping VIP and super fan access only to an alpha test of our Unreal Engine Keshanar City live 3D map build. And we're dropping that tonight. So working out the last technical details, you will find it on Discord, you will find it on Facebook, you will find it via email. Stay tuned. We are very excited to bring this to you. It has been 4 years in the making, 4 years plus, with game designers, with architects, with Egyptian experts, and with Egyptologists. And lots of Dave's love has gone into it. I think you'll find it fascinating. We hope you will. And we're always welcome to give us feedback on it. We'd love to hear in Facebook comments and Discord how you feel about it once it drops. So give us a couple hours and watch out for that link. Dr. Jill, any last words for your super fans and the VIPs? Any last thing you want to say about them joining us here tonight?
Well, thank you for coming. And yeah, you can also message the Keshinar team, and I'm If things are passed along to me, I'm always happy to answer questions. We're hoping that this game is not only fun but educational. I'll be providing commentary throughout the entire game to show what actually happened in ancient Egypt. So if you're interested in ancient Egypt, hopefully this game can help you learn more about it.
Yep. Amen. That's our hope as well. I should mention, Dave, thank you for reminding me in the chat here. So everybody, so when you're waiting for that link for the Unreal Engine build tonight, there are Easter eggs all over the city. The first person to find them gets a prize. You will find them, you will email us, you will get a prize. So be looking out for that. Thanks for that, Dave. Um, Everybody, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Dr. Jill, thank you as always for your expertise and for joining us tonight. This is the Keshanar live stream crew. We're signing off. I hope everyone